it doesn't matter how many riches I bring in, right? Like it doesn't matter if I make $1 million or $10 million. My real mark on life is how many people I can help.
Right.
And that's a different kind of rich, right? I don't need gold. I don't need jewels. I don't need cash. I want to see people live a fulfilling life. And for me, that's everything. So I think that trying to share my story and trying to help people through my story, um, is why God gave me my story,
Mm-hmm.
because he knew I'd share and he knew I'd use it for good.
This is the Fit Investor Podcast, where we talk about how to live a more holistic life of being fit, not only financially, but physically and faithfully. We'll be joined by experts in all these areas to share their experiences and actionable and practical tips so that you can be a fit investor too. So now let's join our hosts, Cale Delaney and Brenna Carls.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Fit Investor. I'm your host, Cale Delaney, and today our special guest is Mr. Trip Ison. Trip is originally from Roanoke, Virginia, but his journey is really nothing short of remarkable. He's a former Division I football player at Kent State University. Then he transitioned into the construction industry after college, dedicating about 9 years to building a solid foundation for his future. However, in 2020, Trip embarked on a transformative sobriety journey, which marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. That same year, he rediscovered his passion for fitness and took the plunge into entrepreneurship, launching his first business. The entrepreneurial bug didn't stop there because in 2021, he started his second business, showcasing his relentless drive and ambition. But Trip's achievements go beyond the boardroom. In 2021, he completed an Ironman, proving his physical and mental toughness, and his commitment to personal growth continued with a profound spiritual milestone in 2023 when he was baptized again, reaffirming his faith. And from 2022 to now, he's been relentlessly training for ultra marathons while successfully running his business. We're excited to dive into his story that's a testament to resilience, dedication, and the power of transformation. And with that, welcome to the Fit Investor, Trip.
I appreciate you having me on. Real quick though, before we start diving into some of this stuff, it's something I think that's cool. You knew me in my past life, right? In my previous hate. So it's really cool to reconnect now on, let's call it, the other side of things.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
both of us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is going to be a catch up for us personally and for the audience here. And just for the audience benefit, yeah. So like Trip mentioned, so we had both worked for the same construction company for many years together down in Florida. And yeah, this was before all this transformation here. So he is a new man and I'm excited to explore this and see what he's got going on. So why don't you just take us back a little bit and tell us how you got to be the old Trip, and then we'll take it into how we got to be the new Trip.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I would date things back. I think that it's important to talk about childhood briefly. Grew up with a single mom. My biological father left when I was 5. Single mom raised me. That she was my first example or exposure to work ethic, willing to make ends meet, make things happen at any cost. And so I was fortunate and blessed to have her. She is unbelievable and still to this day, one of the closest people to me in my life. She ended up meeting my stepdad when I was 10. And that was also a massive transformative part of my life. He is a very special individual. He's faith driven. His relationship with Jesus Christ is something that I admire and something that I've strived for. I'm not there yet. Just being totally vulnerable about it. It's really inspiring though to look to him. He's been a great mentor for me in that and many other things. But outside of those items, once he stepped into the picture, childhood was, I would call it normal. It was pretty awesome growing up in Roanoke, Virginia. It was a good town. It's right there in the Appalachian Mountains, the Blue Ridge. So lots of hiking, lots of outdoor activities. We have all the seasons, no complaints there. Getting into high school, I think, is when I started exploring with not so great alternatives. I would say I started to drink, started to probably make decisions that weren't in the best interest of my future. And at the time, it just seemed like I was having fun. I was having a good time. Everyone was doing it. I looked around and it seemed like everyone was partaking in it.
Right.
I think that I knew underneath all of that, though, that I had it a little bit different than most. I never really drank socially. Just even starting in high school, it was never a couple of drinks. It was drink, fly, block out sort of thing and deal with the repercussions when I came out of it. And so that would carry through high school, and somehow, some way would get an opportunity to go as a preferred walk-on to Kent State. That's how I got there. And it was a Division I program. It was like a dream come true to be able to have the opportunity to go there. It was a shell shock for me though, culturally. Kent State's a really liberal school. And coming from Roanoke, Virginia, there's not a whole lot of that, if you know what I'm saying. But it was a culture shock for me in the best way. It opened my eyes to so many different things. And it was probably like the first step for me to really wanting to travel more and go different places and do different things. Because I realized everywhere you go, people are different, things are different. Some things stay the same, right? But a lot of things change. And I wanted to learn more about the rest of the world. So Kent State gave me that experience. Ended up earning a scholarship my junior year. And that was pretty awesome to make that phone call home, tell my mom, hey, you don't have to worry about school, at least for the next couple semesters or whatever.
Yeah.
She'd been working her full-time job and started a side hustle on eBay just to pay for my school. And she pretty much paid for my first 3 years of my education through eBay. So again, a hustler, right? And I get a lot of that from her. But would wrap up at Kent State. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. Totally lost in my identity. I would say my relationship with my faith at this point was non-existent unless I was in need. If I was in need, I would pray. If something went wrong, I would pray. But it wasn't an attitude of gratitude, that's for sure.
Right.
So I would move back to Roanoke, Virginia after college, start to work with my family's company. And during that process, probably a year in to that process, we got offered a position as a safety facilitator, if you will, on a job for a larger concrete repair company. And this job specifically was masonry. It was a restoration project. And we got to go there and I had a lot of fun. I got to meet new people. I really liked, at that point in time, the culture, kind of what was happening, the teamwork, the camaraderie. I watched them bring people in from different towns, different cities, hire locally, and blend everyone into one team. And that was the first time I felt the reconnection to team since I'd stopped playing football. And that felt really good to me. It felt great to be a part of that. That project would be successful for us. They would offer us another position in Crystal River, Florida. And we would take that. It was another contract job. So I moved down to Crystal River. I left Roanoke. And that project was about another year, safety role. And while there, I was like, okay, I love the team thing, right? This team thing keeps popping up for me. And I want to be a part of this team. And so I started to talk to people within that company about what that might look like to no longer be a contract employee. And ended up getting offered a role in a more of an upper level management position for safety of a region, if you will. And so I would take that and then move from Crystal River to Fort Lauderdale area or Pompano Beach. That was big for me. I felt like that was the first time I was doing my own thing. Prior to that, working for your parents, you wonder at times how much of that is actually you being successful, if that makes sense, or if it was just handed over to you. So getting down to Pompano was big because it felt like I'd earned something. I'd made a name for myself, enough so to get a job offer. And that experience was awesome. Being down there were a lot of great people, made a lot of friends. I think that something else that was big that happened down there for me was I wanted to take that first step and I wanted to purchase a home. And I'd never purchased a home. I'd never really purchased anything. And so made that happen down there in Fort Lauderdale, Oakland Park area. So I was really excited about that. Through that process, not to backtrack too far here, but basically from the time I got back to Virginia after college, up until this point, I had started experimenting outside of just alcohol. I was drinking heavily, but I'd started experimenting with other drugs. I would say by the time I got to Fort Lauderdale, my drinking and drug use had really picked up. I was more of a binge drinker and big binge drug user. So Monday through Friday, I pretty much held them together. I knew that I couldn't start drinking because if I did, it was going to be a 2 to 3 day event. So typically I would work Monday through Friday, and then Friday night I'd go tie one on, and then I'd be up for 3 days drinking and doing drugs. And so that would carry pretty much the entire time I would leave Fort Lauderdale. I hid it in a lot of ways. I tried to keep it under the table. I'm not sure a lot of people really knew what was happening. And I felt a lot of shame around that. But at that point in time, I didn't really care. It was like, okay, I need to do this. I work hard. I've earned the right to let my hair down, if you will. Then I would, after Fort Lauderdale, get some opportunities to travel with that same company to different projects. But at that point, I'd transitioned out of safety. I had an opportunity to transition into a field role. And that's really where my passion is at the whole time. I loved being out there with the guys and the girls. But I loved being out in the field where it was a little bit dirty, it was a little bit messy, probably a little less judgmental for me, at least. It felt that way. And I just felt like those were more my people. So I had a lot more fun out there, having the opportunity then to be in more of a managerial role where I could be a part of building the team instead of just being on the team. And that was big for me. I fell in love with that part of the process. So would get from there some opportunities, went up to Chicago for a job, into Jacksonville for a job, and then would get a call to go to Austin, Texas and do a project there. And that was another big transition for me because going to Texas, I'd never been to Texas. I was carrying this drinking problem, this drug problem with me, trying to figure out how all that was going to work. And shortly after getting to Texas, my role changed from more of, and you're aware of it, I'll try to explain it in a way that maybe the whole audience can understand, but there's different tiers of management positions within the construction industry. Here's everything from like the hands-on technicians and lead men to like hands-on foremen to more of a less hands-on foreman to then a superintendent to then a general superintendent. And within that tier system, I was a foreman. And when I got to Austin, within probably 2 to 3 weeks, I transitioned into a superintendent role. And with that comes a lot more responsibility, right? Like it's not just showing up and being told what to do or who to run and where to run. You have to put those pieces together and be a part of the conversation with your project manager and the client, the engineers and the architects, and being a part of that wheel, right? And I wasn't ready for it. I had to find a way to be ready for it. And so for me, I think my workload definitely increased. I would say my performance increased as well, but my partying also increased. When Friday came around, I had to cut it loose. So it was quite the experience for me. We were down there in Austin for almost 2 years. Throughout that entire time, I drank and did drugs on the weekends and would work Monday through Friday. Usually I might miss a day a month, something like that, maybe 2 days a month. And it was always me making up an excuse, right? The dog got bit by a raccoon. The reality is I never went to sleep and I'd been up partying. And just for clarity, like I have no issue. I talk about this on my own podcast. If anyone's curious about drugs of choice or alcohol, like my drug of choice when I was drinking was cocaine. And I really couldn't have 3 or 4 drinks without thinking about it. I'd get to that 3rd or 4th drink and it was like, all right, I got to find it because I want to keep this feeling alive. And so that would carry the whole time through Austin. We'd transition to another project in Atlanta, superintendent type role. And this is right around 2019, 2020. And I looked in the mirror one day and was like a shell of myself, man. Coming from like a Division I football player and then looking in the mirror and I'm 312 pounds and I can't even walk up the steps without being out of air. No clue where my faith is at. Really lost mentally and emotionally. It's just like my cycle is I work Monday through Friday and then I drink and do cocaine all weekend. And at that point I've been doing that for 5 years. So I started this thought process while I was in Atlanta of maybe something needs to change. That was the first time I'd actually accepted that maybe something needed to change. Other people had tried to tell me prior, but I wasn't listening until I felt it. And so I'd tried to stop drinking and doing drugs for a little bit. And I'd make it a week, 2 weeks. One time I made it 3 weeks. And I would always be like, okay, I can handle it now. I'm better. I went to therapy. I can drink now, or I can be social about this. And it would always end up in a deeper, darker place. And so July 19th, 2020, it was my birthday, actually. I had some buddies in town, and I was sitting on the couch, and we'd been drinking that day, and they didn't know this, but I was trying to find coke all day long. Couldn't find it anywhere in Atlanta. And at that point during COVID, you could get cocaine deliveries like Uber Eats. People would bring it to you. And so, but I couldn't find it anywhere. And I'll never forget, like, sitting on the couch, and this thought just popped in my head of, dude, if you're going to get sober, you might as well do it on your birthday. That way you remember it. And that way there's not like these two different dates you have to keep up with, all this, and it's going through my head. And so I got up off the couch, and it's technically July 18th, so the day before my birthday. I got up off the couch, and it was like 11:55 p.m., and I went and looked in the mirror again, and it broke me. And I think that was probably a bottom I hadn't experienced. The 4 months leading up to that, I'd had quite a few suicidal thoughts. I knew how I wanted to do it, where I was going to do it. I could never formalize the plan, never make the move.
Mm-hmm.
So it took all of that and 4 arrests and all these things to get me to this one moment in the mirror. And in that moment in the mirror, I made a deal with God. And I know that you're not technically supposed to make deals with God, but my deal with God was real clear. And it was like, hey, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't know how you have it destined for me to die, but I feel like it's not drugs, alcohol, or suicide, because if that were the case, it would have already happened. And so my deal with God was, I will push myself in every single possible facet of life as hard as I possibly can. And the second he wants me to slow down, he'll let me know. He'll shift me. But I was going to push in every single way, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, all of it. And I just said to God out loud, I said, I'm ready if you're ready. And that was it. And I went to bed, had my last drink on July 18th, 2020. July 19th, 2020, woke up, and I was like, all right, day one. Long journey. And it took me 30 years to get to my day one. And I try to tell people, if you're not there yet, the quicker you can get there, the better. Because I look back on a lot of that time and I'm like, man, what if, or where could life be? And the reality is everything happened exactly how it was supposed to. I believe it was God's journey for me that I needed to go on to be able to do what I do now. But I just try to tell people, if you can make a shift ahead of that, by all means, do it. But that first day, I was like, okay, the only thing I know to do is I need to go run. I don't know how to run. I haven't ran since college. I'm going to run 1 mile. It took me 16 minutes. I think I made it like a quarter mile before I had to stop and walk. Like I was in pretty rough shape. My blood pressure was like 165 over 115, 120. Resting heart rate was like 95. So I had all of these health issues because of the weight, because of the drugs, because of the alcohol, because of the stress. And I just was like, okay, we'll see what 30 days looks like. I'm going to run every day. I'm going to eat healthy. And I'm going to go to, at that point in time, I was in we'll call it for anonymity purposes, a support group. If anybody has curiosity about what that is specifically, please reach out to me personally and I will happily guide you in that direction. But I was going to 3 of those meetings a day, and it's COVID, so they were on Zoom. And so I could literally walk around the job working and listening to the Zoom meeting and just getting this beat into my brain. It was a faith-based program, which was good for me. I was rekindling that fire, if you will. And 90 days into this process, I had to go back. The program I chose to work was actually in Austin, and we were in Atlanta. And part of that program is to sit down with someone and talk through basically your entire inventory, your life inventory, everything from how many people and who you've slept with to all the things you've ever done wrong and all the resentments that you hold on to and all of these things. I didn't have to do that in person. It's not mandatory, but it felt like it's what I needed to do. And so I flew sober for the first time, probably in 10 years, which was terrifying for me. I loved flying drunk and I had a blast with that, but flying sober was something I just wasn't built for without a lot of work. So I got on a plane though, and I was like, this is part of it. We got to do it. And I flew back to Austin. I sat down and I went through my inventory. But when I got off the plane in Austin, I've had these moments in life where I would call them like spiritual encounters for me, where it's like God's telling me something and it just becomes so clear if my eyes are open. And it was one of those moments when I got off the plane, it was like God grabbed me and he said, this is where you're supposed to be. Right now, this is where you're supposed to be. And so I said, okay. And I went through my inventory and I flew back to Atlanta. And again, I think I tested God in an unfortunate way. Looking back on it now, I handled it a little differently. But I had said, hey, I'm gonna do the work, but I need you to still show me that this is what you want. I need that kind of clarity. And I was real specific about what I asked for. And part of that was like a place to live in Austin. And so I'd hired this real estate / apartment finder person, and basically I'd let them know what I was looking for and not to call me during office hours because I didn't want anyone around me hearing that I was looking for an apartment in Austin. At this time, I was still pretty under wraps.
Right.
And we got rained out one day. Like the day after, 2 days after I got back from Austin, we got rained out. And my phone rang during business hours, and it was the apartment finder. And she's like, hey, I'm at this complex called Belle South Lamar. I was like, really? I was like, that's where I lived the whole time I was in Austin. And she's, yeah, well, I'm here with the property manager if you have any questions. I said, sure. I told him what I was looking for. And he's, oh, we don't have anything available like that for 16, 18 months. And I was jokingly, I was like, that's fine, man. I understand. When you get one like B129, which is the unit I'd lived in the whole time I was in Austin before, I was like, just let me know, that one will be fine. And he started laughing and he goes, that one's actually available tomorrow. And on that one, running a special, no security deposit, no first month's rent. Send me the application. They sent it to me. I filled it out. They got back to me. I'd been approved. I went in the next day and sat down with my PM and told him I was leaving the company. And that was a hard conversation. I developed a really good relationship with that project manager and a lot of loyalty because he took care of me for a long time. And we're still really close to this day. He still comes to my races and paces me, and we still see each other when he's in town or around. So super special relationship there. But he understood. He's like, this is what you got to do. Then this is what you got to do. I'm all in. I'll do anything I can to support you. Of course, then comes the awkward conversations with HR and everyone else who has a lot of questions. And at that point in time, I wasn't about to give them the whole truth. I gave a couple of people the whole truth, but was also like really restricted in what information went out. Because I honestly wanted to not just protect myself selfishly, but the people who'd been around me for those years, because I didn't want them getting bombarded with questions like, why didn't you say something? Or why didn't you know? Or
Right.
it just felt like the best thing to exit. So I helped transition that job for about 2 months. I'd fly back and forth from Austin to Atlanta. And the last trip was right before Thanksgiving 2020. And got into Austin and I was like, all right, started praying about it. I need to know what I'm going to do for work. I went and interviewed with the 3 GCs. I didn't have a job when I went, like nothing. My truck blew up on the way there. My engine blew up. I didn't have a vehicle. I didn't care, man. I was like, I'm right where I'm supposed to be. I'll listen. For the first time in my life, God told me something and I'm here. So whatever you got for me, send it. Like I'm ready to work. So I did 3 interviews, had 3 offers. I didn't know which one to take. And so in the meantime, I was working for this guy, helping him build decks. And we were in there one day. This is probably 2 or 3 weeks after I got back to Austin full time. And this guy in front of me, we were replacing a deck. And the guy in front of me was taking all the screws out of the deck boards. And I was basically coming behind and taking measurement, making the new rips, setting the new boards, so forth and so on. And we get to the end of the deck and he took out the screws in the handrail too, not just the deck boards. And I went and put my hand on the handrail to brace to make a cut. And when I did, the handrail went and I went with it and felt like 14 feet, landed on concrete stairs, broken ribs, cracked hip, all the goodies. And I'm sitting there thinking, laying there, okay, God, like I trying to figure out which job I want. Now I felt I don't have any money. I don't have a vehicle. I'm paying rent on credit cards. I'm starting to feel foolish for leaving behind my career. But it was, again, something came over me and was like, just stay in it. Just stay in it. And so I was, okay. So I went to the hospital, and long story short, I got like the medical report, and they came back in and wanted to do more scans, make sure I wasn't bleeding or anything internally. And about that same time, the lady from triage or dude from triage came back there, and he's like, bad news, your health insurance has lapsed. They were supposed to carry it another 30 days, and they did. So I had no health insurance either. Now I'm like, I just told him, I got up and walked out. I was like, I can't pay for this. I can't. And the doctor's telling me, hey man, if you start peeing blood, you got to come back. Start coughing blood, you got to come back. I was like, yeah, if that happens, I'll be back, but I can't stay for the rest of this stuff. And I walked out of the hospital and went back to my apartment. I'm like, oh boy, what do we do now? Like, I can't go interview for a construction job with broken ribs and cracked head and be like, yeah, I fell off a deck last week. My safety culture's through the roof. So I was praying about it. I didn't know what to do. And Austin had a big freeze about a month after that. And up until then, I was still running every day. That had been going since July, but I couldn't run anymore with this fall. And so for about 3 weeks to a month, I didn't run. I would bike on the stationary bike just to move. And about a month in, the freeze came, and I had this wild thought. I was like, I'm going to see if I can run 100 feet with these ribs and this hip. I was like, I got to move. I got to keep going forward. And I started running, and it was the most painful thing I'd ever done in my life, but I ended up running 5K a month after all that went down. And I came back inside, and I'm like, all right, if I can do that, what can't I do? What could be so difficult? And so I just kept praying. I talked to my stepdad, that's where the faith's all tied into. And he's, why don't you just start a business? Why don't you just do what we do? Build your own freedom. That was the conversation. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. Let's do it. So that kind of launched SCSI, the construction side of things. So it's Site Consulting Services Incorporated, Austin. And in that process of starting that freeze that I was telling you about happened, I had power for 5 days, and I had a buddy get power back. He said, man, just come shower real quick and eat a hot meal. And so I went over there, and he had YouTube on, and this guy, and some of your listeners might know him, his name's Nick Bear. He owns Bear Performance Nutrition. It's based really close to Austin, Texas. He's a former Army Ranger. And he was training for an Ironman. And at this point, I think there's the saying in the Bible, if you're lukewarm, you get spit out, essentially.
Right.
I wasn't lukewarm, but I was boiling hot. Like, I was in it. And so much so that I had this confidence that I was probably ignorant. And I'm watching this guy train for this Ironman. I was like, an Ironman, I can do that. And my buddy's, oh yeah, he's like, that guy's coach on YouTube's my coach. You should reach out to her. She's pretty backed up, but you never know. And so I did. I shot her a DM, told her my whole story, the truth. And she's like, all right. She's, what's your phone number? She answered right back. And I sent it to her. This was on Instagram. She called me, and I tell her the whole story and tell her I want to do an Ironman. She's, I'm in if you're in. And so that was it. I started training for an Ironman. I went and bought a bike with money I didn't have, all kinds of swimming gear, running gear, whatever it took. Credit card debt through my nose, and still paying rent on credit cards. So like I said, we started a business, but people might not know this. When you start a business, that doesn't mean you're making money. You have a business technically. And so I went 10 months, no calls for work, and something kept telling me in my head is, no, God wants you to do this Ironman first. Just do the Ironman. Stay committed, finish something you start, get through this process. So I did. I was going to church. I lost 110 pounds. It took me 14 months, but I went from 312 to about 205. And I went and did the Ironman in Waco, the full distance. Never did a half or anything like that. Just sent it and did the full, finished it. Woke up the next day, my phone rang with a contract offer for building a hospital in San Antonio for the first time in 10 months. And I'm like, okay, I hear you, God. Thank you. It wasn't me. It was nothing I did. You know what I mean? I wasn't out there networking. It was unbelievable. And that project alone would reroute a lot of the debt and get things rolling on a different foot. That was my first experience though with entrepreneurship. And there's an opportunity there essentially to work as many hours as we wanted. And so at that point I was like, man, I'm dying to work. And so they had 12-hour days, I took them. If they had 15-hour days, I took them. And we did really well. We were successful. We were supposed to be there about 90 days. We ended up, they kept us on for 10 months.
Oh, wow.
And so we did well. And during that process, I was like, okay, I'd sold my Ironman bike. I was like, I'm never doing that again. So I want to do something harder. What's more challenging? For me, it's never the event that matters. It's the process leading to it. That's what I've fallen in love with. The commitment and dedication to me is what's helped structure my life, not the event. Anybody can show up and start a race, right? Like you can fill out the registration and not put in the work and show up and start the race. But to show up every day to train for the race 6-8 months, that really changes you as a person. And the part of me was like, okay, well, what's harder? And that same guy I saw doing Ironman was training for a 100-mile ultra marathon. I was like, same confidence, was like maybe a little bit more ignorant this time. I could do that. And so I embarked on that journey, started with the business going, training and running. And it was about this time that the second LLC was formed as well. The name of that one is Ain't Dead Yet. And the reason that really means a lot to me, and it means even more to me now today, I didn't know what it was going to mean. I had no clue. But I'd asked someone I was close with, because they were like, you need to start a separate LLC to whether it's training people or lifestyle coaching, or it's going to turn into something, but you need to go ahead and do it. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know what I would call it. And they were like, every time I ask you, why are you going to do that? Your answer to me is because you ain't dead yet. And so they're like, you need to call it Ain't Dead Yet. And so I did, and started that one up and picked up a couple of coaching clients, just helping people that way. Nothing crazy, not like some super financially like stable position. There was no way I could get out of construction and just do that at that time. So doing both of those things and training for this ultra marathon. And I would say life just continued to shift, right? I never stopped learning. Like that energy or that focus to be like day one every day has kept me going for a long time. And what I mean when I say that is I've had this drive because I made a deal with God to push myself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially every single day. If you've given me a day here, I'm going to push it, because I wasted too many on firsthand in the front of my life. I've been pushing it as hard as I could since then and trying to share my story. And I would say the next big shift would take place September of 2023. I'd get a call late at night that my biological dad had passed away. And I wasn't shocked by the news. He wasn't the healthiest of people. He lived a tough life, a lot of stress, prison time. He had a tough run at it, but I didn't know how he died. They just assumed a heart attack until about 45 days later, and the death certificates came out, and he died of a cocaine overdose. Which, in reading the death certificate, it was blowing my mind, because we had this thing, and it was like reading my own death certificate. That was you. And it was hard, but he knew about my sobriety. I'd talked to him about it, and I'd opened up to him about it, and he never felt that he could share that he was struggling. I had no clue he was doing drugs. Zero. And it was in that moment, I was like, okay, yeah, I had some family members telling me to keep it hush, if you will, and some saying, "It is what it is." But the ones that were telling me to keep it hush, that's what really drove me to start my podcast. I was like, nope, I'm going to make his life mean something. And because I ain't dead yet. And I got that. And I was talking to a friend, he's, you got to start a podcast. He's episode 1, tell your story, and then have guests on that have really adverse times in their life. You build something out of it, give people hope. Because you can connect with a lot of people at the bottom if you're willing to go there and be vulnerable and share your truth. And so that's been that mission. So because of my dad's passing, we launched the podcast. We recorded in 14 episodes now. We've published 10. It's called the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. Go figure. So that's been the mission. And the real mission behind the podcast is to create exposure, because my dream is to open up a recovery center. And within that recovery center, I want to do it what I would say is the right way. And really what I mean when I say that is the majority of rehabs and recovery centers in the United States they're profit centers. They make buku dollars. I think on average in the United States right now it's $30,000 for 30 days. And I'd be willing to venture that 80% of that goes into somebody's pocket, maybe 20% into the attic. And I want to flip those numbers. I'm not in it to get rich. I don't want to see people die anymore. I've lost teammates. I've lost family members, obviously, to drugs and alcohol, and I'm just done with it. And so that's really the main driving force behind that, is to try to help people and give them the right tools. I think nutrition is a big part of that. I think fitness is a big part of that. I think therapy, mental, emotional health is a big part of that. I think spiritual health is a big part of that. And so I want to give all those resources under one roof. And it's not just going to be drugs and alcohol. It's going to be sex, gambling, mental, emotional struggles, whatever it is. And the whole mission being, I don't want to see them again unless they're coming back to tell their story to help others. I don't want repeat customers. And so that's where we're at today. We have the construction business, and then we have the podcast, and the goal of the podcast is to lead to the ability to open a recovery center.
Hey guys, it's Brenna Carl, CEO and co-founder of The Mortgage Shop. When I'm not spending my time searching for the best pizza in town, working out, well, because of pizza, or fighting sharks as Kale likes to say, I spend my time educating clients on the best investment products that will help them build generational wealth and making sure their loan process is as smooth as warm butter on a piece of toast. Call us today to get started with your investment journey at 800-816-7982, or, to talk more about pizza. Talk to you soon.
So hope all that made sense.
Yeah, man. Well, you made my job easy as the host. You dug into pretty much everything that I was going to want to dig into. So I'm really inspired hearing your story. And again, for audience, this is the first time I'm hearing this stuff. Like we mentioned in the beginning, like I knew the old Trip, and I knew about the alcohol stuff because I had seen that, but I didn't know about the drug part. And so that's surprising to me. At the same time, I can certainly see that, because at that time you were a big boy. Yeah. You were 300 plus, you said. And now if anybody's watching on YouTube, Trip now. And of course he mentioned he lost all the weight and he's doing Ironmans and 100 ultra marathons. So obviously he's in shape now. So he's completely unrecognizable physically from how he was when I knew him. And here you talk mentally and spiritually from the person I knew back then as well. It's really cool for me to hear your transformation journey and see all the behind the scenes of what was going on, and when I knew you, and now the transformation that you've had to get you where you are today. I think it's great, man. And there are some things I wanted to dig into a little bit there. How did you said the drug of choice is cocaine. Did you start that when you were in high school or college, or was that later on?
Yeah. So never really did any hard drugs at all in high school or college.
Okay.
Did about a year after I got back to Virginia.
Okay.
And I was scared of it and forever. I had opportunities to do it, but I was terrified of it. A lot of it was happening around me, and I wasn't doing anything to get away from it.
Okay.
And one night I was so drunk, I was essentially, I would act like I was doing it just to avoid the peer pressure and brush it off the table. But one night I was so drunk, I actually did it. And I'll never forget that feeling. It was like being held, but at the same time, I could have endless energy, endless focus. I could talk to anyone. I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel less than. I felt like I was a part of everything that was moving. And that was a feeling that I wanted to continue on. But I never did cocaine sober. It was only when I was drinking. But it started about a year after I got back to Virginia.
Yeah. And to hear that, and this is maybe an eye-opening thing for a lot of people like it is for me, in that to hear that you were in this cycle for years. You said Monday through Friday, do your thing at work, Friday night through Sunday, you're up doing drugs and drinking. And to be more or less a functional addict for that long, and to keep it under wraps more or less for that long is, again, it's eye-opening just to think of how many other people are doing that right now that we know in our personal networks. that we're just not aware of. That's got me thinking about that a little bit, because that's the thing. Like we oftentimes get wrapped up in our own stuff and never stop to think of the struggles that other people are going through. And everybody's got something that they got going on, whether you know it or not. So that's an eye-opening thing for me. And your parents, especially your mother, since you said you have a great relationship with her, did she know about the drugs and alcohol, or to any
You knew
extent
about
the drinking? Okay.
everyone knew about the drinking, right?
Sure.
That you were around me, it was pretty
Right.
up.
Right.
I had, whether it could be anything from a private function to a work function, I was tearing it down pretty hard. But I don't think really anyone had an idea outside of the people that were super close to me in that world, which no one really knew
Mhm.
about my drug use. It was a different crowd, right? Like in South Florida is a perfect example. Like the people that I associated with and did drugs with weren't a part of anything else I had going on. Kept those things separate intentionally.
Yeah. Okay. And then along the way, and I guess first off, so you said your stepdad, you said you admire him as a man of faith that you aspire to be. Is your mother Christian as well?
She definitely is. But I would say my stepdad is not that there's levels to Christianity, right? But when I see him, I see like a true Christian, like through and through.
Right.
He owns his flaws, his shortcomings, but I've seen him help everyone along the way. I've seen him take care of his family and strangers and homeless people. He's just the most loving spirited person that I think that I've ever met. And he gives all that credit back to God. So for me, that's what I meant by it. He's always inspired me in that way.
And was he planting seeds along the way?
The whole time.
Maybe now looking back, you can see that.
The whole time. Yeah, the whole time. And his seeds worked. I tell people this all the time. There's multiple ways to help bring people closer to faith.
Mhm.
And I won't knock any of them, but there's certain personalities that are receptive to certain things. And for me, being told what to do was never something that was going to get me to do it.
Right.
So he would say things like, I would call him with a problem or challenge and talk to him about what was going on in my life. And he would say, let's pray about it. Almost infuriating at a point. I'm tired of praying about it. And he'd say things like, prayer doesn't necessarily always work without change or action. It takes a little bit of that. So he plant little things in me like that along the way. And that was big for me. Because like I said, the night I got sober, I was talking to God. And I don't think if it wasn't for him, I don't think that conversation would have happened now. But I knew I could turn there, because no matter what I'd done wrong, like I said, I've been arrested 4 times. And every single time to that, or me going broke, or whatever the situation was, his answer to everything was, let's pray about it. Everything. If something great happened at work, his answer to that was, let's pray about it. And so it was ingrained in me, but in a very soft way. It wasn't forced. And so for me, I turned to it that night because I was like, this is what the person that I look up to the most tells me to do in every situation. This must be what I need to do in this situation.
Right.
And so if it wasn't for him, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. And that's why I love hearing people's testimony stories, because it's often on that flip side that we can finally look back and we have that 20/20 vision and hindsight to see all those people that got planted in our path, and the seeds that were planted, and connect the dots and see how they came to fruition. I know that's true in my faith journey. That's true in your faith journey. And that's oftentimes the case with most people. And that's why it's so important for us to be planting those seeds as well. And that's the Great Commission, is to make disciples of all nations. And just like you said, there's so many ways to plant those seeds. It can just be through your actions and how you live, like your father and your stepfather. It can be through a ministry. It can be through, which I guess what you're looking to do with your Ain't Dead Yet brand and podcast, and ultimately a recovery home. It is a ministry, right? I'm not sure if the plans would be for it to be a faith-based type program or not, but it's a ministry in one way or shape to help people get recovery. So there's so many different ways to plant those seeds, right? And that's why it's so important, especially in today's society, that as Christians, to be outspoken and to be bold about it, and not succumb to the societal pressures of leave your faith at the door. type thing, which there's a lot of pressure for that. That's talking about missions. That's the mission that we have with Fit Investor as well, is to open up that platform for people to be bold and outspoken about their faith and their businesses and their fitness, and not to keep things separate, but to be outspoken and get it out there in the marketplace. So I think that's cool. I always love hearing about that stuff. And the other thing is, you mentioned it a couple times, was that you made a deal with God, or you tested him in one way or shape. And the way I look at that is, and again, it's my opinion based on what I understand in scripture, is it falls down to the intent, right? If you're coming to God from a broken and surrendering standpoint and saying, God, here I am, if you will take my life and turn it around, I will follow your will. That's one thing, right? Versus coming to God with a prideful attitude and saying, hey, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. And there's a couple examples of that in scripture. Jesus gives an example of the Pharisee who goes in to pray, and he gives this real nice flowery prayer, but more or less talking about, hey, how great I am. Thank you, God, that I'm not this terrible person standing next to me praying, who is this broken sinner who won't even lift up his head, saying, God, I'm a sinner, have mercy on me. And he says, who came away justified? The guy who wouldn't lift his head up to God, who surrendered to him, right? So that's the way I look at it, because I know you said it's not really the right thing to do, but I think in those instances, maybe it is the right thing to do, right? If you're coming at it with that broken and that surrender intent.
Yeah. And that's what it was. There was no pride left. There's no ego left. It was, fortunately, and I believe by the grace of God, stripped away.
Right.
Because some of us are hard-headed.
Yeah.
And for me, it needed to be stripped away, all of it. And that's why I still do ultra marathons. It's one place where I can create that situation or scenario where there is no ego, there is no pride. 60, 70 miles in, there's no ego, there's no pride. I mean, taken out by a lease. Like it doesn't matter how bad you are, how big you are. And I love putting myself back in those scenarios and situations now, because that's where I really realize what's important to me. My fear. How did this journey happen? Who's to think? Where do I need to put the glory? Am I acting right? Am I doing the right things? Am I connecting with the right people? And those are things that come up in those moments. Whereas when I'm filled with pride and ego, it's about me. And it's what I can do for me and how I can make myself feel better and all these different things, super self-centered. So I think for me, to strip the ego and the pride away is what creates the selflessness within me to help others.
Right.
Because I realize, looking back now, and you don't see this a lot of times until you're a good bit out of that haze, there were so many people along the way that stood out in my journey to try to help me and to try to just plant those seeds, if you will. And I'm grateful for all of them. And some of them I don't like as people, right? Like I still don't like them as people, but that doesn't remove my gratitude for them, because I think that so many people are genuine and do want to help others. And whether or not I receive that gracefully, that's not on them. They're making an effort. And for me, I think that all I can do now, looking back, is have gratitude for all I'm along that journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the other remarkable thing, and which really just points to the providence of God and giving him the glory, is that when you went cold turkey, you didn't just go cold turkey on the drugs. You went cold turkey on alcohol. You went cold turkey on fitness, like all at the same time. Any one of those three things is a struggle that unfortunately a lot of people don't make it through to the other side. And you hit all three at once. And that is just another testament to God's grace and God's glory through your life and your transformation, you know?
Yeah. And cold turkey on my career.
That's it.
I did everything they told me not to do. Okay. Because in my brain, I'd already talked to God about it. I'm like, you don't understand, because you weren't in the conversation with God. I was there.
Mm-hmm.
and he just said, go. And so for me, I'm the type of person, and I was this way when I was back in the other game. If you gave me you said go, I was going. It was more like, go ahead and slow me down if you need to, but I need to go, need to push. And so it's very similar for me like that. And I don't think, again, if the intent's correct and your alignment's correct, he'll slow you down if he needs to. He'll redirect you if he needs to. He redirected me when he let me fall off that deck.
Yeah.
That was a redirection. I was like, no, you're not going to go work for these construction companies. That's not what I had in mind for you. Because if I would have went and done that, one, I wouldn't have the first business. Two, Ain't Dead Yet would never be a thing.
Right.
I would have never done the Ironman. I would have not had the podcast. I wouldn't be wanting to open a recovery center. Like all of those things stem from me falling off that deck. So I tell people all the time, in these big moments in life, or what seem like big moments in life that feel overwhelmingly negative, man, there might be just some unreal blessings on the other side of that.
Yeah.
You just have to stay in it and stay faithful. But I'm not perfect. It's easy to get upset. I mean, it's easy to be human and say, why me? And be a victim. Those things that's real. It happens to pretty much everyone, unless you're just truly built different, which most people have those thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
When you have them, that's the perfect opportunity to turn to God and say, okay, I feel like, I truly feel like with my intent, I was doing everything I could to glorify you. This happened. There must be a reason. That's faith. And then once you get to that place and you realize it is what it is, you're good. Like you just keep moving forward. And that's why I was able to get on the stationary bike 2 days later and then go run a month later. And but all that's God saying, hey, I wasn't trying to break you forever. I just needed to redirect you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about it, because who knows, maybe if you had gone and taken one of those construction positions, you might have fallen right back into the situation you were in before.
Yeah.
And I always look to the heroes of the faith that we have examples in the scripture. When you look at taking bad situations and turning them into a positive and looking for God's will in them. And like Paul, he's always one that I go to. He lists all the things that he went through: shipwrecks. How many times was he beaten with 39 lashes, left for dead, stoned? Like, you read the list of what this guy went through, and it's, for anybody on the outside, you're like, what is going on? Give it up, dude. Like, obviously you're doing something wrong. Right. But no, he understood. He had, of course, a great connection with God, and he understood that these sufferings were to be looked at in joy and used for God's purposes. And of course, he's one of the great heroes of the faith, thousands and thousands of years later now. Not to say that makes it any easier when we're going through it, but when we need that source of inspiration and we need that encouragement, again, it's just another example of that, going back to God's word. Nothing new is under the sun. All right. We can find the inspiration and the encouragement for any situation in life by going to God's word. And if we call on him to help us, if it's in alignment with his will, he's faithful to do. We just got to be open to receiving that.
Yeah, for sure. I tell people all the time, or ask them, can you name another book that you can apply any situation to in life?
Yeah. Right.
Any other book? And
yeah,
that's a hard question, right? That's a hard question to answer, but that book gives that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I don't know. I feel fortunate in that God's always been a part of my life, whether I was close to it or not. I could feel it, and I knew it was there. And I think a lot of people might not have that same experience, and I can only hope that they do. But it takes an openness and a willingness. And again, it takes a separation of ego.
Right.
To really connect. It takes you saying, I'm nothing. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter for me, this is my personal approach on it. It doesn't matter how many riches I bring in, right? Like, it doesn't matter if I make $1 million or $10 million. My real mark on life is how many people I can help.
Right.
And that's a different kind of rich, right? I don't need gold. I don't need jewels. I don't need cash. I want to see people live a fulfilling life. And for me, that's everything. So I think that trying to share my story and trying to help people through my story, is why God gave me my story,
Mm-hmm.
because he knew I'd share and he knew I'd use it for good. So I think, again, I had to have all those experiences, and there's nothing I feel shame around today. If anybody wants to see more, like I said, it's all on my podcast, and that's my billboard. Right? You can look at it for what it is. It's all there. But none of this is possible without God. It's not even debatable in my brain on any level. So it's for the glory of God.
Yeah. So what would you say to somebody who is struggling, be it with drugs or alcohol or perhaps something else, but they're in that functional addict stage? What would you say to someone like that?
It's a great question. I've never been asked what would I say to someone deemed functional, but it's a great question. I think how I would answer that in this moment, and I'd like to reflect on it more, but I definitely think that the way that I would answer it is people that are functional in addiction or alcoholism or anything else, they're strong-willed. Right? There's a different level of will there, especially if they're functional. So my question to them would just be, hey, if you're already achieving X and you're functioning as an alcoholic or an addict, what do you think wild if you let those things go?
Right.
Because for a lot of people who are strong-willed and driven, that's enough, right? It's, wait a second, he's right. If I set this down, I could double my salary, or I could double my real estate portfolio, or I could double my relationship with God, or double my relationship with my wife, or whatever those things are. I think that telling them or asking them that question sometimes gets that to surface. If it's someone who's not functional, that's a totally different conversation. That conversation a lot of times looks like, are you happy with how your life's going? Is this what you wanted? Because no addict or alcoholic, when they're 5, 6 years old, right down goal in life to get an alcoholic, right? It's not, it's just hard to get out of because there's such a stigma around it. And there's a lot of shame, and people are unwilling to associate themselves with addicts or alcoholics or whatever. And the reality of it is, from somebody who's been in and around the rooms and been in a lot of places with a lot of addicts and alcoholics, there isn't a single that I can think of right now. There isn't a single profession, race, gender, faith, none of it that is exempt from addiction or alcoholism.
Right.
So it's more than likely somebody, and probably closer to you than you'd like, that's having some sort of struggle that they can't open up about. And the reason they can't open up is because of little slight comments that are made, and they're not even intentional all the time, but they hear them. Because if you create an environment that's open and say, hey, check in with your friend, and not only that, you good, but hey, how's your mental? How's your emotional? A lot of times it'll come right out of that. That conversation will get kicked off pretty quick if someone feels like someone really cares.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I would say though.
Yeah, I think that's great. And how important is it to you now in being intentional about the relationships you foster?
Man, another great question. I've had to do a lot of work on that, and a lot of therapy, actually. Most of the relationships I've struggled with, boundaries specifically, have been within my own family. Learning to put boundaries in place around family, and that's been difficult for me because I was raised, blood is blood and blood's thicker than water, and you got to show up for blood no matter what. And my therapist asked me this question one time, and he said, sure. He said, these people in your family that you're required to show up for, would you be friends with them? Do they align with where you're headed?
Right.
And the answer to that was no for a lot of them.
Right.
And his answer to that was, then you need to go ahead and cut some ties. So that was on the family side. Now, from a friendship perspective, or a platonic or romantic perspective, I would say, and I don't say this to scare people, because there's probably people that have had much more success at it than me. My experience is your circle gets a lot smaller as you start growing.
Right.
Not everyone's going to understand. Not everyone's going to support you. Not everyone's going to get behind your purpose. And that's okay. You have to be willing to, again, set those worldly things down. If you believe your purpose is in connection with God, it really don't matter who's with you, but the right people will come around. The right people will start to pop up in your life. God will put them there, especially if you're in alignment. But my life's become much less about making all these new relationships. I think in my previous, even in career, I wanted to be friends with everybody. I wanted everyone to like me. I wanted to get along with everyone. And now that I'm on this journey, I don't really care if you like me or not. I feel like I'm living my truth and I'm speaking my truth. And if you like it, amazing. Welcome aboard. But if you don't like it, that's okay too. I don't hate you. We're just not meant to be on the same path, and that's okay. Your path might be greater or worse. It doesn't matter. Like it's just not in alignment. So learning to separate all that's been difficult for me. It's been quite the challenge. And then on the romantic side of things, it's been challenging too, because again, I think it's natural in a lot of ways through temptation and other things, to be attracted to people strictly based on their physical appearance.
Right.
And sacrifice all these other things that are so important to you. But that physical appearance, it's sad, but for me, has never been strong enough to keep that intact. And so learning to select partners for the right reason has been a learning curve for me, especially since losing the weight and getting in shape and having a couple of businesses. Like you get more options, and that can be tempting for someone who's been 312 pounds for 5 years.
Right. So
learning to pick people that you feel are placed versus place people in your own life. So it's tricky for me though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Man, Trip, you've certainly given us a lot of inspiration and encouragement in sharing your story. So I greatly appreciate that. And you've already given a lot of great tips and all that stuff. If we can boil it down into 3 actionable or practical tips for our audience based on what we've talked about.
Yeah, for me, I can speak on what's helped me, and hopefully some of it or any of it can resonate with others. One thing I would say the top of that list is, it is very obvious to me when I start my day with prayer and when I don't. It is so clear to me on the difference in the day. And I'll be halfway through the day and be like, oh yeah, probably pray this morning. And that might sound crazy to people, but for me, that's how it goes. So starting the day and ending the day with prayer, I would say, bookends my day in a really positive way. So that would be my number one thing. My number 2 thing within those bookends is how my day is structured. Most days, so I would say 95% of all days, I'm up at 5 a.m. I like to get up before the sun's up. The only reason I do that, it isn't some crazy Goggins inspired mindset. It's an opportunity for me to not be involved in anything else other than myself and maybe my relationship with my faith or my relationship with business. But it's those relationships that are intimate to me. No one's calling at 5 a.m. No one's texting at 5 a.m. So I would say wake up early, right? For me, that's been huge. And I think that if I could go back and do it all over again, those 2 things would certainly be at the top of the list. And I think third for me, what's really helped me is to do something every single day that I don't necessarily want to do. And some days that's running, some days that's doing the dishes, some days that's getting on an airplane sober, right? But it's doing something every single day that requires me to lean on something bigger than myself. If I believe that I need to be fit in order to serve my purpose on earth, then I need to let go of the fact that I'm tired and just go get it done. If I believe that I'm terrified of flying, but if I believe God's purpose for me is so great, he's not going to kill me on this airplane, I need to go get on the airplane.
Right.
I don't want to do it. I'd rather drive 20 hours or fight 4 ninjas. You know what I mean? I don't know, something crazy, but those are the things that I think have kept me humble, but also given me so much self-confidence at the same time. And both of those things can coexist in such a beautiful way if you know how to balance them out. So those would be my 3 things, man. Prayer, morning and night, wake up early.
Yeah.
Third, Do something you don't want to do every single day, as long as you feel it progresses you or it's in alignment with your purpose.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's perfect. Awesome. 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 So many good things here. So if our audience wants to follow you, find out more about you and what you've got going on with Ain't Dead Yet, or just reach out to you, what are the best ways?
Yeah, great question. Instagram is probably the easiest. I have a personal page and then an ADY page, but the ADY page is at ADYATX. And then if you go on to YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, you can look up Ain't Dead Yet podcast and find us on there. But if you want to get in direct contact with me, the easiest way to do it is through that Instagram page, ADYATX, and just shoot me a DM. If you're struggling or somebody's struggling, they need a friend, they need someone to talk to, will just listen, no judgment, send them my way. Doors are always open for anything along that. I feel like that's why I was saved. So there's nothing greater you can do for me than to provide those opportunities. So if you don't hesitate.
Love it. Love it. Well, love the mission you're on, man. And I'm sure this is going to inspire people. And like Tripp just said, if you know anybody struggling or you're struggling yourself, reach out. So I want to thank you again, man, for sharing your story. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for another episode of The Fit Investor.
Appreciate you.